The smell of lasagna had always meant home to me. Every Sunday without fail, my mother would spend the afternoon layering noodles and ricotta and sauce in the big ceramic dish my grandmother left her. And by 6 o'clock the whole house on Birchwood Lane smelled like something worth coming back to. For 31 years, that smell meant safety. It meant belonging. It meant that no matter how hard the week had been, there was a place in the world that was mine. I should have known that Sunday was different. The lasagna was store-bought. My husband, my ex-husband, now had been living in the guest room of my parents' house for 3 weeks by then. That detail alone should tell you everything you need to know about how my family operated. When Daniel and I separated, my mother had called him before she called me. When I showed up at the house with 2 suitcases and mascara halfway down my face, my father had shaken Daniel's hand in the hallway and told him, man to man, that these things take time. My younger sister Madison had texted me a string of broken heart emojis and then gone back to watching television with my husband in the living room that used to be mine. I had moved back into my childhood bedroom at 31 years old, the twin bed with the white headboard. The glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling from 1,999 that nobody had ever bothered to take down. A closet that still smelled faintly of the body spray I wore in high school. I told myself it was temporary. I was a senior financial analyst at a logistics firm downtown. I had been with the company for 7 years. I had a salary my mother once described, not unkindly, as more than your father ever made, and I had been quietly building an investment portfolio since I was 24 years old, reinvesting dividends, buying index funds, never touching it, never talking about it. My family knew I had a good job. They did not know what that meant in numbers. I had learned early that money, in my family, was not a private thing. It was a resource to be redistributed toward whoever needed it most, and whoever needed it most was always, somehow, Madison. Madison was 27. Madison was between jobs, which in our family was a condition that had lasted approximately 6 years with occasional interruptions. Madison was sweet and funny and completely unbothered by the fact that she had never once paid rent in her life. My parents didn't see this as a problem. They saw it as love. The lasagna sat in the middle of the table, still in its aluminum tray. My father poured himself a glass of wine and didn't offer one to me. Daniel sat across from me, cutting his portion into neat squares with the focused attention of a man who knew something I didn't. My mother cleared her throat. She said she and my father had been talking. She said that with Daniel staying in the guest room, things were feeling a little crowded. She said that Madison had just mentioned, nothing serious, that she would love to have more space. A real bedroom, she said, instead of the sunroom. Somewhere she could put a desk, maybe start looking for work again. And my room, my old childhood room, had always been the nicest room in the house. The one with the good light. I put my fork down. My father said he wasn't trying to make this difficult. He said it with the particular tone he reserved for conversations where he was, in fact, making things very difficult. He said I was a grown woman with a good income and it didn't make a lot of sense for me to be sleeping in a twin bed at my age anyway. He said there was a perfectly nice apartment complex on Delwood Avenue. He had driven past it just last week. The parking lot always looked full, which he understood to mean the place was popular. I looked at Daniel. Daniel was cutting his lasagna. My mother said she wasn't asking me to leave immediately. She said I had until the end of the month. She said this like she was doing me a favor. I picked my fork back up. I finished my dinner. I said, okay. I said, that's fine. I said it the way you say things when you have already decided, somewhere beneath the words, that you are done. Nobody at that table knew what I was worth, and I had just decided to keep it that way a little longer. That night I sat in my twin bed under my glow-in-the-dark stars and opened my laptop. Not to cry, not to call a friend, not to write in a journal. I opened Zillow. I wasn't looking for an apartment on Delwood Avenue. I want to be honest about what I was feeling in that moment because I think people assume revenge is hot, that it burns, that it comes from rage. What I felt was quieter than that. It was something closer to clarity. Like a fog had lifted and I could suddenly see the full shape of a thing I had been standing too close to for years. My family had looked at me my entire life and seen a resource. A responsible one, a reliable one, but a resource nonetheless. My income was a safety net for everyone else's choices. My stability was a permission slip for their instability. And my patience, my endless stupid patience, had taught them that there were no consequences for any of it. The end of the month was 22 days away. I had been pre-approved for a mortgage 18 months earlier, almost on a whim, because a colleague at work had mentioned it was smart to know your number before you needed it. My number was substantial, I had never done anything with that pre-approval letter except save it in a folder on my desktop labeled MISC. I started looking. Not on Delwood Avenue. I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I knew it the moment I typed in the search parameters. I wanted something in the Crestwood neighborhood. I had grown up going to the farmer's market there on Saturday mornings. I knew the streets, the coffee shops, the way the light came through the oak trees in October. It was 3 miles from my parents' house. I refined the search. There were 14 listings. I eliminated the ones that needed structural work, the ones with no garage, the ones that backed up to the highway. I was left with 4. The third one stopped me. It was a craftsman-style house, built in 1938, fully renovated in 2019, 4 bedrooms, a home office, original hardwood floors, a kitchen with marble countertops and a gas range, a covered front porch with a porch swing, a backyard with a mature maple tree. The asking price was $1.1 million. It had been on the market for 11 days. I looked at the exterior photo for a long time. Then I looked at the address. Then I used the satellite view on Google Maps, and I rotated the image slowly until I could see the full street, both sides, the neighbors on the left with the basketball hoop, the neighbors on the right with the flower boxes, and the house directly across Birchwood Lane. My parents' house. I could see my childhood bedroom window from the satellite image. The one with the good light, the one they were giving to Madison. I sat there for a moment in the dark with my laptop warm on my knees and the glow-in-the-dark stars slowly dimming above me, and I felt something I can only describe as the universe making a very specific kind of joke and deciding to be in on it. I emailed the listing agent at 11:47 at night. I said I was interested in scheduling a viewing as soon as possible. Her name was Renata. She called me the next morning at 8:15 and said she could show me the house that afternoon if I was available. I told her I was very available. I drove to Birchwood Lane after work on a Tuesday and parked 2 houses down so my father wouldn't see my car. I walked up the front path and Renata was already on the porch, keys in hand, and she shook my hand and said the sellers were motivated, and I said I understood completely. The house was perfect. That is not nostalgia or exaggeration. The floors were warm and golden in the afternoon light. The kitchen felt like the kind of kitchen where you actually cooked things, where the space was generous enough that 2 people could stand at the counter without bumping into each other. The office had built-in bookshelves and a window that looked out onto the maple tree. The master bedroom was 3 times the size of the room with the twin bed and the stars on the ceiling. I stood on the front porch after the tour and looked across the street. I could see the curtains in the front window of my parents' house. I could see my mother's car in the driveway. I could see, on the second floor, the window of the room they had given me at birth and were now taking back. Renata was saying something about the neighborhood association and the annual block party in July. I said, "I'd like to make an offer." She paused. She said, "You haven't seen the inspection report yet." I said, "I'd like to make an offer today, above asking, and I'd like to close in 30 days. The inspection came back clean. The sellers accepted within 48 hours. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Madison. I did not tell Daniel, who was still, somehow, sleeping in the guest room and eating my mother's reheated pasta. I went to work every day and came home every night to my twin bed and my diminishing stars, and I said nothing. My father asked me twice if I had looked at the Delwood Avenue apartments. I said I was looking into it. He nodded like a man who had handled a difficult situation responsibly. The closing was on a Thursday morning. I wore a gray blazer and I sat across the table from the sellers, a couple relocating to Portland for a new job, and I signed my name 18 times on documents that transferred a craftsman house on Birchwood Lane in Crestwood into my sole ownership. When it was done, Renata handed me a set of keys on a small brass ring and I held them in my palm for a moment before I put them in my pocket. I drove to work. I answered emails. I sat in a 2-hour budget review meeting without saying a word about what I had done. That evening, I called a moving company and arranged for the following Saturday. On Friday night, my mother made chicken and rice, and we all sat at the table, and my father asked how the job was going, and I said fine. Daniel showed my mother something on his phone, and she laughed. Madison painted her nails at the kitchen counter while the rest of us ate. I watched all of it with the particular calm of someone who already knows how the story ends. The movers arrived at 8 Saturday morning. I had packed my own things during the week, quietly, 1 box at a time after everyone else was asleep. There wasn't much. I had lived in this room for less than 2 months, and I had never really unpacked. By 10:30, the twin bed was bare and the boxes were in the truck, and I stood in the doorway of my childhood room for a moment and looked at the stars on the ceiling. My mother was in the kitchen when I came downstairs with the last bag. She looked at the bag. She looked at me. She said, "Where are you going?" I said I found a place. She said, "The apartment on Delwood?" I said, "No, not an apartment." She said, "What do you mean?" I said I had bought a house. She stared at me. I said it was nearby. I said I thought it might be nice to stay close to the neighborhood, since I had grown up here and I knew it well. My father had come in from the living room by then. He said, "You bought a house?" He said it like the concept required reassembly. I said yes. I said I'd better get going, the movers were waiting. I said goodbye. I hugged my mother, who was still holding a dish towel and looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Something that was not quite recognition but was heading in that direction. I drove 3/10 of a mile. I pulled into the driveway of my house and the moving truck pulled in behind me, and I unlocked the front door and stood in the entryway for a moment, alone, before anyone else came in. The floors were warm. The light was exactly as good as I remembered. From the front window, if I stood at the right angle, I could see straight across Birchwood Lane. The movers were very efficient. By 2 in the afternoon, the furniture was placed and the boxes were stacked in the right rooms and the truck was gone and I was alone in my house for the first time. I made coffee in my kitchen with the marble countertops. I sat on my covered porch with the porch swing and I drank it slowly. At 3:15, my mother's car pulled out of the driveway across the street. She drove 3 houses down toward the stop sign and then she stopped. I watched the car sit there for a long moment. Then it reversed, slowly, and pulled back into the driveway. My mother got out of the car. She stood in the driveway, and she looked across the street and she saw me sitting on the porch. I raised my hand in a small wave. She stood very still for what felt like a long time. Then she went inside. My father called me at 4 o'clock. He said, "Is that your car in the driveway across the street?" I said yes. He said, "You bought the house across the street from us." I said yes. He said, "Why?" And I thought about that for a moment, about all the things I could say, about Sunday dinners and guest rooms and the good light and a store-bought lasagna that tasted like an ending. I said, I liked the neighborhood. I said it was a good investment. I said the inspection came back clean and the sellers were motivated and I closed in 30 days. He didn't say anything. I said, "Dad." I said, "Tell Madison she can have the room." I hung up. That night I slept in my new bedroom for the first time. The ceiling was plain white, no stars. The bed was a king with a mattress I had chosen myself from a store on a Saturday morning 6 months ago when I had been thinking ahead, planning quietly the way I had always planned, the way nobody in my family had ever bothered to notice. I did not sleep right away. I lay there in the quiet of my house on Birchwood Lane, and I listened to the sounds of a place that was entirely mine, the refrigerator humming, the maple tree in the backyard shifting in the breeze, the distant sound of someone's wind chimes 2 doors down. I thought about the conversation at the dinner table. I thought about my father's tone and my mother's dish towel and Daniel cutting his lasagna into neat squares. I thought about all the Sundays I had sat at that table and swallowed things that deserved to be said and told myself that keeping the peace was a kind of love. It isn't, though. I know that now. Keeping the peace is sometimes just another way of agreeing that you don't matter. My sister called the next morning. Not Madison. My older sister Claire, who lived in Denver and had made a clean exit years ago and who I had called from the closing table on Thursday morning, just to hear a voice that wasn't going to complicate the moment. Claire said, "Mom texted me. She said you bought a house directly across the street from them." I said yes. Claire was quiet for a second. Then she said, "You absolute legend." I laughed. It was the first real laugh I had produced in longer than I could remember, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and surprised, the kind that means something has shifted and is not going back. I made breakfast in my kitchen. Eggs with fresh herbs from the small pot on the windowsill because I had bought fresh herbs the day I moved in, a small deliberate act of permanence. I ate at my kitchen table and looked out the window at the backyard and the maple tree. Twice in the following week I saw my mother standing at the front window of their house. Each time she looked across the street for a moment and then the curtain fell back into place. My father stopped by on Wednesday evening, ostensibly to borrow a specific kind of drill bit he was certain I owned. I let him in. I showed him the floors and the kitchen and the office with the bookshelves. He looked around in the particular silence of a man revising something he thought he understood. He said it was a nice place. I said thank you. He found the drill bit in my garage and he stood at the door on his way out and he looked across the street at his own house for a moment, this time from the other side. He said, "You planned this." I said, "I plan most things, Dad. I've always planned things. You just never asked what I was planning." He nodded slowly. He left with the drill bit. He brought it back 2 days later and he stood on the porch, and he looked like he was working up to something, but it didn't come, not that day. Maybe it never would. I had stopped holding space for things that might never come. Daniel left my parents' house 3 weeks after I moved into mine. I heard about this from Claire, who heard it from my mother, who apparently told the story in a way that made it sound like a mutual and graceful transition. I don't know where he went, and I find when I check that I don't particularly want to. Mattis can't the room with the good light. I hope she enjoys it. I work from my home office on Tuesdays and Thursdays now. I sit at my desk with the built-in bookshelves and the window that looks onto the maple tree, and I do my work, and at lunchtime I sometimes eat on the front porch with a book. If my parents are home, I occasionally see movement in their windows. Once my mother waved back. It was a small wave, uncertain, like she wasn't sure of the protocol. I waved back. I have no interest in holding a grudge. Grudges are expensive, and I am, at my core, a person who thinks carefully about where she puts her resources. What I have instead is a boundary, clear and quiet and built into the foundation of a house I own outright in a neighborhood I chose deliberately. 31 years after I was born, and 11 days after my family handed me an ultimatum over store-bought lasagna. On the last page of the journal I started the night they told me to leave, I wrote one sentence. I wrote it after I signed the closing documents, after I got the keys, after I drove to work and answered emails and sat in the budget meeting like a woman who had not just reordered the entire geography of her life. I wrote, "The room they wanted to take became the down payment on everything. The maple tree is turning now. October in Crestwood is exactly as beautiful as I remembered from the Saturday morning farmers markets. The light coming gold through the leaves, the air carrying the particular sharpness that means summer is done, and something more serious is beginning. I sit on my porch in the evenings sometimes, when the weather is still warm enough, and I drink my coffee and I watch the street go quiet. The neighbors on the left have a dog who wags his entire body when he sees me. The neighbors on the right brought me a pie the second week, peach, still warm from the oven, and we stood on the porch talking for 40 minutes about the neighborhood association, and the best hardware store, and the farmer who comes to the Saturday market with the good honey. This is my street now. These are my neighbors. This is the life that was always available to me, waiting on the other side of the moment I finally stopped making myself smaller to fit into someone else's plan. Across the way, the curtains are drawn at my parents' house. The driveway is empty. It's a Sunday evening, and they're probably somewhere, maybe at dinner, maybe at Madison's new favorite restaurant on 5th, maybe sitting in traffic on the way home, tired and full and not thinking about much. I think about them sometimes. Not with anger anymore that burned off faster than I expected, like fog in the morning, here and then gone. I think about them the way you think about a place you grew up, with something complicated that is not quite love and not quite something else but sits in the space between. I raise my coffee cup in the direction of their house, a private toast, witnessed by no one. Then I go inside, into my house, onto my floors, into the life I built when they handed me the only thing I actually needed. A reason to stop waiting.